In 2012, J.K. Rowling announced to the world that Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, is gay. By this point, I still hadn't read a single Harry Potter book. Crazy, right? Who hasn't read the fantasy novel following Harry Potter's journey into the wizarding world? Well, after hearing this bit of news, I was intrigued and read the entire series with the assumption that there would be some form of queer representation. But there was none of that. Finding representation in books, media, or really any aspect of life is difficult because the world is so transfixed by heteronormativity. According to the International Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, heteronormativity is an invisible and pervasive assumption of heterosexuality, embedded as a normative principle in our social institutions and theory. This assumption has drastically negative effects on members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Kristen Cottrane, sexual health and identity journalist from Teen Vogue, puts it best when she explains that assuming that everyone is straight and cisgendered has detrimental consequences when it comes to bullying, homelessness, and safety of LGBTQ+ folk. Heteronormativity is so prevalent in society that we aren't even aware of it. However, it is past time that we recognize this, because queer people exist. Gender non-conforming people exist, and it is unfair to devalue their existence. So first, let's examine the origins of heteronormativity through colonialism as we examine our acceptance letter to Hogwarts. Then we will board the Hogwarts Express train as we conduct our subtle heteronormative behaviors until finally we are sorted into houses as we sort out the struggles queer people face as a result of heteronormativity. Oh, and since J.K. Rowling won't be giving us a gay book, here's mine. There is evidence of Native Americans celebrating same-sex relationships and gender nonconformity dating back to the 1500s, most notably Two-Spirits. According to the Indian Health Service Organization, Two-Spirits are individuals who combined activities of both men and women, with traits unique to their status as Two-Spirit individuals. In many tribes, they occupied a distinct alternative gender, amounting to a third and sometimes fourth gender. They were also tasked with important jobs and had same-sex relationships. Our modern-day interpretation of LGBTQ was already embraced by Native culture. But, of course, leave it to colonization to ruin all of that. Once colonization started, many barriers were put in place to oppress and invalidate natives and their culture. According to Kathy J. Cohen, political scientist, author, and social activist, many of the roots of heteronormativity are in white supremacist ideologies, which sought to use their regulation of sexuality to designate which individuals were truly fit for rights and privileges of citizenship. This allowed for a gateway of oppressive laws to be put in place. For instance, marriage laws, which enforced heterosexual relationships and turned Native women into economic property for white men, and sodomy laws, or anti-homosexual laws, worked in tandem to take land from Natives and wipe out their queer existence. This not only oppressed Natives, but also set the tone for the future, that anything straying from heterosexuality is felonious. Funny how we're so quick to point the finger at other countries for homophobia, when it in fact originated in colonial America. Now, just as you can't assume that all Slytherins are evil, you can't assume that everyone is straight. I mean, Drarry, come on, those two arch nemesis had chemistry. But this normalization of being straight is perpetuated by gender norms that rely on heterosexual stereotypes. This is highlighted by Maya M., queer editor and writer for Bustle. She explains how one night out at a restaurant relies heavily on heteronormative etiquette. In your typical male-female relationship, the man is expected to open the door for the woman, order food for the both of them, be the first to taste wine, pay the bill, and then close the door on their way out. The whole night is surrounded by heteronormative thinking. Even on the drive back, you may hear a song on the radio with lyrics like, "He was a boy, she was a girl. Can I make it any more obvious?" Yes, Avril Lavigne, please make it more obvious. This isn't 2002. Ooh, and don't get me started on BuzzFeed quizzes. We can guess the first letter of your soulmate's name. Question 1. Do you prefer shy guys or bad boys? Sorry, unless you're talking about the shy guys from Mario, neither. This creates massive problems for those who fall outside of your heterostereotypical relationship because not every couple can fulfill these roles. Even straight couples can't. But we can get even more subtle. The National Park Foundation found that people in their queer panel wanted their new LGBTQ museum in Chicago to show their distinct experiences and subcultures. But people in their straight panel just wanted to learn how queer people are similar to themselves, showing us that when people diverge too far from the norm, other people get uncomfortable. This is especially the case for queer folk since they don't abide by heteronormative standards. Furthermore, heteronormativity distorts representation for the LGBTQ community. The Guardian examines this in shows like Glee, Pretty Little Liars, or Gossip Girl, finding that these shows rely heavily on stereotypes like the gay best friend, the violent transgender, or the hypersexual lesbian. And these stereotypes dehumanize queer folk, fueling a fear of us. Don't get me wrong, society is progressing in the realm of queer portrayal, but it's rare to find representation that paints us as normal people. And speaking of representation, many Harry Potter fans are fed up with J.K. Rowling's lack of representation in the franchise, because she is the one who announced that Dumbledore is gay. Of course, books and media don't have to represent everything, but if you claim to have that representation, it better be there. Instead, J.K. Rowling is violently transphobic in her new book series and on Twitter. And this brings me to my third point about heteronormativity. When society predominantly represents the majority population, that brings a sense of invalidation for the minority population. Kelly C. Johnson, scholar of the Health Equity Institute, explains in a study that identity invalidation is a unique form of minority stress that may especially affect non-binary individuals. NBs are severely underrepresented, as is the case for many identities in the LGBTQ community. This is why coming out is such a big deal. But the consequences go so much farther than just a phobia of LGBTQ. When society favors cis straight people, everyone gets hurt. Compulsory heterosexuality is a term used to describe how society compels people to be straight, or more specifically, compels women to be attracted to men. As the master doc entitled Am I a Lesbian explains, compulsory heterosexuality can manifest in a multitude of ways, whether it be liking the idea of being with a man but not the reality, seeing sex with a man as a chore, or rationalizing a lack of attraction to man by setting impossibly high standards. This affects all women, not just queer women, because compulsory heterosexuality is tied to misogyny and teaches us that the sole purpose of a woman's sexuality is to please men. But this also impacts those outside of the identification of female in nuanced ways. Kate Bornstein, famous queer icon and author, eloquently sums this consequence when she says, "A hierarchy that puts the heterosexual masculine man who is not transgender at the top, gross, gets everyone else in trouble who cannot be like, or be liked by him." So, even if society hesitates to accept queerness, you can't deny the magic of the LGBTQ community. In learning about the origins, nuances, and problems of heteronormativity, we can begin to deconstruct this distinction between queer and normal. Because in hindsight, embracing our differences will bring us together. So, no matter who you a Dumbledore, I hope you live daily ever after.